Hello and welcome to the Hoop Collective podcast. We talk about the NBA, which we're doing on Sunday afternoon/morning, depending on where we are spread out here. Joining us from Boston, Massachusetts, where he's headed for a weekend of preseason action at the TD Garden. And that was some action you got to see on Saturday, Bontemps. I believe the score was 120. Was it 130? What was the score of that game against the Sixers?
The Sixers played in Iowa on Friday night. A little homecoming for Nick Nurse, Des Moines,
yes.
Iowa. Which he told me is now fully Timberwolves country, which is interesting. So there were a ton of Wolves fans at the game. They played the Wolves. So on Monday night.
Well, I will tell you that it is definitely within the Timberwolves range for League Pass. Because you can't get away from that Timberwolves range. You thought that the Dallas Mavericks or Los Angeles Lakers area was big. Wait till you see how big from Missoula to Wichita. You can't see a Timberwolves game because that's your region. Sorry.
Well, so on Monday, I was in Philadelphia with our guy, Jonathan Gavoni, to see the Sixers play the New Zealand Breakers. We have this guy, Kareem Lopez, who's a young Mexican prospect who is a top international prospect in 26th draft. He didn't play, and the Sixers won 139-84. So that's a 55-point spread. Fast forward to Saturday. After playing in Iowa Friday night, the top 8 players in the Sixers rotation did not play in this game on Saturday. A lot of Gershon Yabusele return minutes. And the Celtics won 139-89.
139. I thought it was
so that is a 105-point swing from one game to the other that I saw the Sixers in this week. So a couple of rough preseason games.
Joining us from the Dallas, Texas area, he's out of his home today in a special location, is MacMahon.
Howdy, partners. Just a little getaway to the lake before I head to LA for some Malik Andrews show action this week. Looking forward to that.
Well, first off, we're talking about the rare Des Moines Boston back-to-back.
Probably the first time there's been a Des Moines
time. Yes, I agree.
Yes,
I agree. What is the worst back-to-back you can remember, MacMahon? Maybe that you did or that you've seen, because I've got my answers.
I mean, the one that would always be the most brutal is whatever West Coast city to Denver. Like
Portland,
but
that happens
Denver,
20 times a year.
That sort of a thing. Worse for a team or worse for me personally?
Okay, both.
I don't remember where I was coming from, but I was in a stretch of 9 games in 10 nights where I was on a plane every day. And I remember the plane landed and I got a text from one of our editors, and I had a home game in Dallas that night. And the text was, "Can you get to Memphis? The Sixers are there. They just traded for Jimmy Butler." And so I was like,
I remember that was right when I started.
I was like, yeah, I would need to buy a shirt when I got there. Like I didn't pack for, so I grabbed my bag, walked to the ticket counter, bought a ticket to Memphis, went back to security.
You bought a ticket at the counter.
Yes.
like this is 1984.
Yes. Went to Memphis and got to Memphis in time for walked down the street. I bought a shirt and I forgot what the place was, but in the Peabody Hotel. It's a funky dress shirt too. And got to I remember chatting with Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons that night. Simmons seemed not quite as enthusiastic about it as Embiid did.
There's a breaking news
precursor of things to come. Yeah.
Bontemps, your worst back-to-back.
The most memorable one I would say is I was in my first or second year at the New York Post covering the NBA, and I had made the mistake because I was still young and traveling of booking like a bunch of travel together around the All-Star game, which was in, I believe, New Orleans. And I had booked going to Chicago for the second night of a back-to-back from New York, then going to New Orleans, then going somewhere else, then going to the start of a West Coast trip after the All-Star break. And it was a 7-flight thing. It would have everything would have been derailed if it got canceled last second. And there was a massive blizzard.
Oh, I remember this
in New York.
Yeah.
And so I rented a car and I covered this Nets game and I just drove to Chicago because otherwise I was
On
not
the
gonna.
back-to-back from New York to Chicago.
I was just never gonna get out of the city. So I drove to Chicago, and I got there at like 6 or 7 or sometime in the morning. I don't remember what time it was. Early. Slept for a few hours. Went to the game, and then I picked up my itinerary to fly to the All-Star game the next day. So
I do remember
that was
another
the most
one.
memorable one.
I remember a Toronto Brooklyn back-to-back for the Mavericks, which that's not too tough. Got to go through customs, but not too tough. And it was the night that Dirk hit the 25,000 point milestone in Brooklyn, which I almost missed because it was one of those deals where I got on the flight in Toronto, conked out, and I was out for a while. Woke up, kind of refreshed, looked around, realized the plane was still on the ground.
Ooh.
You're like, I landed. Oh, wow, this flight's over.
We hadn't left yet. Now I was out for a good couple hours. And so that was one of those deals where finally got to the hotel, scrambled, got dressed, hustled to the arena, and I think we were midway through the first quarter.
Another one that I just remembered that is a funny story that Mike Wells tells anytime he's ever near me was it was also the first or second year I was covering the league, and the Nets had a back-to-back in Indiana and then Toronto. I remember this because MacMahon said the game was in Toronto that he was in. And I realized when I got to Indiana that I didn't have my passport in my bag for whatever reason. So I flew back to New York and had it brought to the airport. And then I picked it up, I went in, I got another plane, and I left. This would have been fine, except for the fact that I get on the plane to go to New York, and our guy Wells is sitting there going to New York because the Pacers were going to play the Knicks, I think either the next night or the night after that. This is like the height of the Paul George era. And so he was like, why are you on this plane? The Nets are going to Toronto. Why are you going home? I was like, oh, well, I forgot my passport at home. So that one is only memorable because anytime I've been around Wells for the last 10 years, he tells this story to everybody repeatedly. So it's come up many times.
Jax, I'm about to tell a story. It's special to you.
No, story time.
The worst back-to-back I've ever seen. I wasn't on this trip. The worst back-to-back I've ever seen. This actually happened. The Denver Nuggets played a back-to-back in Syracuse, New York, and Portland, Oregon.
What?
Not Portland, Maine. Rough. You don't believe me? You can look that sucker up, Jackson. I don't know what year it was, but I think Melo. I don't know if Melo gave them the money that year. It was a Melo honoree game, and they played a back-to-back. I mean, I gotta tell you, like, it's pretty. Like, I've seen some crazy stuff this week. Like, you'd think they were getting away from preseason travel. You know, most teams have cut down with preseason. But this week I've seen some stuff. I've seen a Des Moines, Boston back-to-back. That was interesting. The Suns went on a Palm Springs, East Lansing, Michigan road trip. You don't see that every day. That was a Matt Ishbia, Tom Gore's Michigan State special game. Still, nonetheless, the Lakers.
Well, how about Atlanta having their game against the Heat rescheduled because of the storm to Wednesday? And they're going from Atlanta Monday to Miami Wednesday to Oklahoma City on Thursday.
Oh my God, that's smart. Rough too. Well, Oklahoma City figures into my worst personal back-to-back. So anyway, there was a preseason back-to-back that took place with the Denver Nuggets, where they played in Syracuse on one night and Portland, Oregon the next. At least in that case, they were going west, and they have a charter plane and whatever. But okay, so the crazy one I remember in the preseason was my first year covering the Cavs. Again, this can be Googled if you can't believe it. They played at home, and the next night played in St. John, Newfoundland.
Whoa.
St. John, Newfoundland. Now, St. John, Newfoundland, I know how far away it is because to get there, you had to connect in Toronto. It was a 3-hour flight from Toronto. 3 hours east of Toronto. Okay, that's how far out there Newfoundland is. They get out there, and the floor is not usable. It's a hockey arena, condensation or whatever. And they find out pretty quick they're not going to be able to play the game. So they actually didn't play. Again, this is LeBron James as an 18-year-old in St. John, Newfoundland. I'm fairly certain LeBron has not been back unless he was like taking a private jet, had to refuel there or something. And so they call the game off, and I can remember Vince Carter, and I can't remember because they were playing the Raptors. I can't remember, Vince Carter and somebody else came to the center court and they gave them the microphone. They're like, "Oh, we're sorry, folks. We can't play the game. We'll be back. Thank you, St. John." The Raptors have never been back. This is one of those things I keep track of. 21 years later, the Raptors have not been back. They played Montreal this year, but they have not made the St. John.
Did LeBron tweet? Did LeBron tweet asking for an explanation of why they're flying away to Newfoundland for one preseason game?
We were years and years and years away from Twitter, and many years away from LeBron joining.
Well, and by the way, this whole thing just sums up the fact that this entire preseason schedule is absurd. And the way that this is going on now is completely ridiculous. Most of these guys,
I feel like they've gotten away from it, and teams are like having 3 and 4 preseason games and basically not playing in non-NBA venues, but it's creeping back in now.
Well, but it's also just like, I just don't understand why the NBA is playing 4 and 5 and 6 preseason games for anybody.
Well, whatever. If you want to play 6, okay, you have your reasons for that, but don't play back-to-backs.
Well, but forget even the back-to-backs. Whether the back-to-backs or not, these guys are the star players are barely playing anyway. It's basically become the NFL preseason. They play like a couple quarters, and then that's essentially all they play. To me, this is a very simple thing. Preseason should be 1 week of training camp, 2 preseason games the next week. You start the games for the regular season the following week. You get a whole extra week back in the schedule. You get rid of 6, 7, 8 back-to-backs for every team. You'd be down to like 6, 7 back-to-backs across the league. And guys, in theory, be playing in more games in the regular season. There's more time to spread the season out. And you're not sitting through these ridiculous preseason games where even if it is the back-to-back, half the
you're sitting through them, Bontemps. You're sitting.
There's a lot. There were a lot of people in the building last night. Still.
I'm sitting through some. You know what this is, Wendy? This is Bontemps, the volunteer Joel Embiid MVP campaign manager. He's got to take a year off. He's trying to figure out how to get back in the mix.
Joel Embiid ain't winning MVP this year. I promise you that.
You're going to take this year off.
We'll talk about that. I will say this.
Take every year off.
The Celtics.
I'm very firmly on this preseason kick.
I don't know who's going to play for the Celtics today in this game you're going to against the Raptors. The Celtics did play their front line on Saturday, and Jaylen Brown is crushing. He looks spectacular.
Awesome. I mean, they were playing.
Tatum looks pretty good too.
Team. Yeah,
I know, but Jaylen Brown looks awesome. There is no hangover on that guy at all.
Yeah, they were playing a G League team, but they looked great. I mean, the Tatum thing is interesting. He's reworked his shot a little bit. It's got a lot quicker, seemingly a pretty good amount quicker release now, which is going to be interesting to see if that translates over to the regular season and how it looks. But yeah, I mean, they were playing, like I said, the top 8 guys of Philly didn't play, but the Celtics looked awesome and definitely look ready to go in, I guess, 8 or 9 days when they play the Knicks here in Boston to start the season.
So you had a story that's publishing on Monday, Bontemps, looking at the 76ers that was really seemed to me like a product of the reporting that you had and the conversations you had with the Sixers when you were with them at training camp. You had a lot of exclusive stuff in there. Probably the most interesting thing relative to how this season's going to go is some Joel Embiid quotes, but I'll let you tell us about what's in that story.
Yeah, I mean, in talking to people over the last couple months coming into the season, the questions around Philly have centered around how much is Joel Embiid going to play? Is he going to wear the brace on his knee? Is he going to play back-to-backs? Like, what is the plan to get him through the season? The plan seems pretty clear. I would say it's the best analog is to Kawhi Leonard in 2019 with Toronto. That year, Kawhi played 60 games. He didn't play in any back-to-backs. He missed a few other games here and there and was ready to go when the playoffs started. That seems pretty clearly to be what the plan is for the Sixers. Joel and Paul George both, I think, are very likely to play and very likely to miss just about every back-to-back, or certainly the vast majority of them. Joel told me he's going to wear the brace, which I've been interested to hear what he was going to say about that. He really hates wearing braces or face masks. Anytime anybody's watched him play with either one, he's constantly yanking at it and grabbing at it.
Well, you can't throw the brace off as easily as you can throw the face mask off.
Which he always throws off, yes. Yeah. But he's constantly fidgeting with it. He told me he's gotten more comfortable with it and has wrapped his head around the idea that while he thinks he could maybe play without it, it's better to play with it. And while he said, I believe the direct quote was, it might not look as pretty with the jab step, but I'm still going to be able to do it and it'll work.
Is that what you think? Does Embiid think that his game is pretty? You can say a lot of things about his game, but I don't think pretty.
I think
is
Joel likes the style points on certainly his offensive moves.
Paul George has a very pretty game. I can't say the same for Mr. Embiid, with all due respect, Mr.
Well,
Embiid.
sure. Well, and the other thing I think that's probably most relevant longer term is, going back to training camp, we talked about him dropping this weight. And when I talked to him about it in the Bahamas, talked about the fact that he's looked at Tim Duncan, who around this stage of his career dropped a bunch of weight. He's a guy who had, obviously had some knee issues early in his career, wore a brace for a big chunk of the second half of his career, and dropped a bunch of weight to be as nimble and healthy and put as little stress on that knee as possible. And that's somebody he has really tried to look at and say, this is what I need to do now that I'm getting into into my 30s in this part of my career. So this is obviously going to be a massive story all season. We saw Joel only play 39 games last year. There's obviously the constant discussion of his health going forward. But if he and the Sixers are able to get on this plan and stick with it, and he plays in the neighborhood of 60 games like Kawhi did 5 years ago, and is healthy going into the playoffs like Kawhi was 5 years ago, and can ramp it up then, these guys feel like they can go toe-to-toe with anybody in the league. And so that is their number one focus all season. And I can hear people saying, Paul George just did this with Kawhi Leonard and the Clippers.
Yeah.
This is going to end in failure. I totally understand where that position is coming from. I'm not saying it's even wrong, but the Sixers feel like they've got as deep a team as anybody outside of Boston in the league. They think they could beat anybody if they're healthy. And their entire focus for this year is trying to get to the end of the line with these guys in one piece, which is why they went after Andre Drummond in free agency. Joel called Drummond personally and recruited him. They've got a bunch of wings they could play behind Paul. All this stuff's going to be geared toward having those guys ready to go in April, and we'll see if they're going to be able to.
Well, I tell you what, Wendy, the Sixers bring Bontemps to the Bahamas, and it is all sunshine, boy. I mean, USWB is usually urine-soaked wet blanket. No. Unbelievably soft, warm blanket here, baby.
Sure.
Oh,
sure.
He's got visions of running those rocky steps for the finals.
There's I can feel the Caribbean breeze. No blanket is needed. Oh,
yes.
Oh, that's right. Unbelievably sandy,
bougainvillea.
Warm beach. Forget about the blanket.
The scent of bougainvillea and lilacs on the breeze.
Listen, I'm not sitting here saying this is going to work.
I understand.
No, I know. Listen,
you're laying out the plan.
That's the plan, and
it is interesting because obviously they have taken steps to minimize the damage of Embiid sitting and even of Paul George sitting. And, as you point out in this story, they've got ammo to upgrade before the deadline if there's opportunity there. And we all know how aggressively Daryl Morey is going to explore those opportunities. I do wonder if at a certain point, seating becomes concerning. I mean,
Embiid's quote, by the way, was, I don't see it. Well, I don't want to, that's not exactly, I don't have it in front of me. But basically, said, I don't know if I'll play back-to-backs the rest of my career.
Yeah.
I mean, you always have to, whenever Joel says anything, you have to sort of take it with some shades of truth and shades of him making comments.
Take it with a grain of sand, so to speak.
A few grains of sand. But because he even said, as part of a longer part of that quote, which I don't know if the whole thing will get in the story, he was like, look, if we're playing the Bucks and Knicks on back-to-back games, or the Knicks and Celtics back-to-back games, you're going to want to play against both of those teams. But the overall message is essentially, we're going to try to be smart about all this stuff. And look, in the past, we saw last year, Joel was coming in games up, 20, 25 in the fourth quarter to get to his marks for these various stat things he was doing. There was there's always been other stuff going on around him, right? He obviously was very interested in winning MVP. Check that box. And it does feel like, at least now, and to go back to the pod motto of actions over words, everything that he's done over the past few months, from recruiting guys to preparing for the season, to dropping the weight, to the discussion about back-to-back stuff, it's all pointing in a direction of being focused on the main thing, and that's it. And now we will see if the actions were backing that up in January.
Do you have a sense of how exactly they plan to manage these back-to-backs? Because, like, are they both sitting together? Are they splitting the back-to-backs?
So here's the thing. Like, let me just say this real quick about that, MacMahon. Plans in the preseason. Remember last year where LeBron was going to play 30 minutes?
28 to 32.
It lasted
Yep.
one game.
Yep.
Plans in the preseason are exactly that. But I will say this: if Embiid and Paul George haven't played together, I can't see them splitting games. I think you got to play them together.
And then what does the league office say about that if you're sitting two stars, multiple times, many times over?
Well, let me just say right out of the gates, I'm going to tell you, and this is something that everybody in the league is still coming to grips with. One of the things that you have to do early in the season is, you don't have to, but you should, and the league should too, prioritize NBA Cup games. So, like, for example, there's a back-to-back in the second week of November where the front end of the back-to-back is against the Knicks at home. That's a cup game. And the next night they play the Cavs. Both of those are really, potentially important games. Obviously, most of the time, the guys are going to play the first night of the back-to-back, not the second. But we've seen guys, pick and choose those over time. Like, you're going to prioritize the cup game, right? Isn't that what you're supposed to do?
Yes.
That's what Adam Silver wants.
And it's a national TV game on top of it.
Right. So, like all that stuff figures in. By the way, just as an aside, like, the NBA Cup is not going anywhere. They have a brand new sponsor, and they have an 11-year deal this year too, but after this year to televise it. Yep. The NBA Cup is only going to get bigger and bigger and stronger.
Yep.
And like, teams are they may be dragged into a kicking and screaming, and fans may continue to ignore it, but it's only going to get a more and more relevant thing. And the NBA's got a gigantic new sponsor, Emirates, who's sponsoring it.
I'll tell you, I'm curious to see how seriously coaches take this thing and how much they want to compete, because there might be an NBA Cup curse. Old Darvin Ham raises that little ribbon to the rafters and still gets kicked.
I will say the ribbon. I will say this. The NBA Cup, we didn't do a good job in the media last year. The teams, I don't think either, with their strategy. We didn't do a good enough job in the media talking about how important the margin of victory was.
Yeah.
When you watch European soccer,
one person did.
Yes, Bontemps, you're without flaw. It became a big deal like the last, 2 nights of it. Also because not everybody in each group plays at the same time. In international soccer competitions, they do play at the same time, so you don't have an advantage. That you watch the other game, but you don't really have an advantage going.
Well, we got to get expansion here faster. Get to 32 teams, and the NBA Cup will have even groups, and everybody can play together.
There you go. Another reason that's going to happen.
The only reason it matters.
Yeah,
no
but just in general, the NBA, what happens in the, if you're down 17 points in midway through the fourth quarter of the first NBA Cup game, this is a normal NBA game, you would, who we playing next? That shouldn't really be the case anymore. Teams are highly incentivized to play to the end of those games, which is why in international soccer, if you see a team that's down 2 or 3-0 in a cup game, you see them press all the way to the end, because that goal that they get in stoppage time at the end to make it 2-1 or 3-2 or whatever could end up being very important. So that's just a little aside. But anyway, you had some other stuff about the Sixers that you were talking about in this piece, Bontemps.
Well, to go back to something MacMahon said that I think is really important to look at, particularly in the East. You look at this Philly team, they've obviously got very significant injury questions with Joel and PG. PG, who played 74 games this past year, and I think hadn't played over 60 the prior 4. You look at New York, Karl Towns has had a ton of injuries. People have not talked about that hardly at all since the trade. But after he was pretty much an Iron Man the first 4 years of his career and never missed any games, the last 5 years, I should say, played 35, 50, 74, 29, and 62 games. That's a lot of years with not a lot of games. So, and he's obviously a massively important piece for them. We'll see if OG Anunoby can stay on the court. He's another guy who's had a lot of injury questions. And then you've got the Bucks. Giannis Antetokounmpo has obviously had various knee things at different times. Dame missed some time last year. Chris Middleton had surgery on both ankles or feet this summer. Brook Lopez is 35. All three of these teams are expected to be in the top 4 with the Celtics, right? If you look at the teams behind them, particularly Indiana, Cleveland, and Orlando, those are all young teams with pretty deep rosters that should be pretty healthy. So to MacMahon's point about worrying about seeding, if these teams start having injury questions or guys missing a bunch of games, like I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that any one or all three of those teams is somewhere around the play in March and like trying to deal with avoiding that or potentially having to play Boston early, like last year when Philly was 7th. Like I think the Sixers are a deeper team this year than last year, but that was what happened last year. Joel got hurt. He missed half the season and they were 7th.
There's a massive difference between 2nd and 3rd, just in terms of home court advantage potentially in the 2nd round, or slipping to 4th and you're dealing with the Celtics likely in the 2nd round. I mean, I understand playing for the long haul, but the seeding is not irrelevant.
No, it's not. It's not a cakewalk to play these other teams. So that is going to be a balance, and I'm very curious to see how not just the Sixers, but all these teams walk. And yeah, look, I mean, they're in as good a place as they've been in the years I've been around them because there's no drama hanging over the team. There's no questions about what the future is going to be. They have a group. Their 3 stars are all signed for at least 4 years. Paul George is the guy with the shortest contract. He just signed a 4-year max deal. So like they feel good about the group they have. They can add pieces this summer. Joel's saying all the right things and to this point doing the right things. We'll see what he looks like when the season starts. And we'll see where they wind up. But I think the one thing you're alluding to is in talking to Daryl Morey about the challenge of trying to get over the hump is he's another guy. We talked about Paul George. We talked about Joel Embiid. Daryl's gotten to the conference finals a bunch of times, not broken through in the playoffs ultimately to get to the finals to win a title. And he actually joked with me. He said, I don't know. Somebody told me this, and I'm not sure if it's true, but I think this year's team has the best title odds of any team I've ever had because the 2018 team was going up against this team, if you remember, that had Kevin Durant joined Steph Curry on it. And he said, I think this Boston team might be the best
18 team, you said. 7?
Yes. The 17-18 Rockets, the team that won 60-some games with Chris Paul.
The quote-unquote hamstring away
Yes.
team. Although I will point out that the next year, Chris Paul's hamstring stayed intact. Kevin Durant missed the last, whatever it was, at least 2 games of that series, and the Warriors still closed him out. So
that's right.
But his point, the bleeping Giants.
Yes.
That's right. One of my favorite Steve Kerr press conferences ever.
Those 2 teams really did not like each other very much, to put it mildly. No.
But and by the end of the second year, neither did the Rockets didn't like each other.
Yeah, that was
also part of the problem.
Can you imagine if that night, MacMahon, because I was there too in Houston. Can you imagine if that night, if you were in the Warriors locker room and/or told Chris Paul that he would be a Warrior like 5 years later?
No way.
You'd gotten thrown out.
It's hard to fathom. But yeah, Daryl's saying that he thought the Celtics are the best team since that Durant Curry Warriors team. I thought was an interesting line.
Well, the reason that's interesting is that was the last team to repeat.
Yeah, I think that's an accurate statement.
Yeah, I mean, first off, just in general, I think it's always terrific when an NBA general manager will go on the record. And Daryl has done this over the years, and nothing he said was inflammatory. But I mean, I always appreciate that. In your story. Secondly, as you said, MacMahon, I mean, that is not a shocking statement, but it's not something I had thought about. But it's a reasonable thing to say.
But when is the last time? And I don't know what the answer is in terms of the actual odds, but when is the last time that a champion went into the next season this much the favorites? This heavy of a favorite.
Well, I mean, the betting.
I would argue a year ago.
Yeah, but I
betting
will say
odds
this.
Wise.
Well, I will say this on the GM survey, which I understand the GM survey is not, the solid gold answer. I don't even know how many of the GMs are actually even filling it out themselves. But last year, the GMs, we all agreed that Denver was the favorite to repeat. We all felt really good about it. I favored it. The GMs did favor Denver to repeat, and they got 33% of the vote.
Yeah,
which was considered a strong percentage. This year, the GMs, again, I'm not saying that this is necessarily, a thought out opinion, but the GMs picked Boston, which is not a surprise, at 83%. Overwhelming belief that they're going to win again. And I think some of it has to do with the way they've looked in the preseason as well. So,
yeah. Also, by the way, just looking at Basketball Reference tracks preseason championship odds among everything else, and the Celtics and Nuggets, according to this, were actually co-favorites going into last year, both at plus 450. Celtics plus 300 now. So take that, Bontemps.
Well, that's a good counter. I just, like, going into last year, I thought everybody was saying that, and I thought we were certainly all saying that we thought Denver was the clear favorite to do it again with Jokic back and their team healthy and like everybody there. But yeah, listen, I mean, Boston looks really good, and they're going to be really good. And if they give Kristaps Porzingis healthy, like, they're going to be really tough. I mean, these, like last night, Sam Hauser and Peyton Pritchard come in and start just bombing away from three. Sam Hauser pulling up from 25 feet, easy. Like, I mean, they're 8 or 9 deep. Lou Cornett comes in, scored like 15 points in the first quarter last night. He's their third center. Like, they're really deep across the board. They can do whatever they want stylistically. They're in a great place too. It's going to be hard to win.
You'll get a chuckle out of this. The actual answer to my question, the last time a defending champion was this heavy of a favorite going into the next season, the 2021 Los Angeles Lakers were plus 275.
Well, there you go.
Didn't quite work out.
I mean, that I sometimes think back to, because it was happening right now. Like the Lakers, either like sometime the anniversary of them winning was like either yesterday or tomorrow or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the next season started on Christmas. I mean, the draft was 15 days before the start of the season or something crazy like that. Like it was such an insane time. Like
the off season was 40 days long, I believe.
Well, and the other thing,
unless you didn't make it to the bubble, and then it was like 9 months long.
Yes.
Yeah, Wendy, you've noted this many times. The Lakers' odds aren't necessarily predictive as much as they're just taking advantage.
They've gotten a little bit better now that it's not always established by Vegas odds makers. Like a decade ago, when the only place you could really bet on this was Las Vegas, and that's where the bets were made, the above board bets were made. And a huge number of those bets were people coming over from Southern California on the weekends. It was impossible. Even if you were correct on a Laker futures bet, the odds were nowhere fair to you because they just knew.
Unless you were shorting them, usually.
Unless you were going the other direction.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. But even then,
a positive Lakers bet was never going to be a good bet value-wise, no matter how good they were.
It's still probably not that good relative to everybody else, but at least the betting pool is, the targeted market is spread out. ESPN bet is, operating in a lot of states. All right. Well, speaking of the Lakers, check out that story by Bontemps. It's if you're a Sixer fan or interested in the Sixers, it's there's a lot of really good quotes in there from all the.
I don't think we'll be seeing Joel Embiid play in the preseason. That's my hunch. You might get a very, very brief cameo, but otherwise,
Nick Nurse has been very evasive, sort of more and more creatively evasive on when he's being asked by the media for a Joel timeline. He's like, I'll let you know. I'll get back to you.
Yes, we'll let you know where things stand. I think where things stand is he'll be playing against the Bucks on October 23rd in Philly, and if he's not playing then I think we'll have some real questions. But I suspect he'll be out there.
Yeah, I think it's about where things sit, and Embiid sits on the bench and cheers his teammates on.
That's right.
All right, so the Lakers and JJ Redick went to a strange one-off. LeBron reference or MacMahon referenced LeBron's tweet the other day. Why am I getting on a plane to Milwaukee in mid-October for a one-off game? And it was a fair point. Bobby Marks pointed out that the preseason schedules are arranged by the teams, not by the league. So this is not the league sending them there. There was no national TV element with it. The Lakers, right now the Lakers can't use crypto.com. Yeah, there's a major renovation going on there. Not major, but there's a pretty heavy renovation going on there right now, especially outside the building, because I was there all week. Chick Hearn Court, which is the street that fronted the arena, is not there anymore. It's been totally ripped up. It doesn't exist. I think that section is going to be closed anyway. I don't think that road is going to exist anymore. By the way, you should see, there's dirt everywhere. They've ripped up all the concrete. They've ripped up all the road. There's guys working on the roof of Crypto. There's guys working on the outside of Crypto. They're redoing all kinds of stuff. The Kobe statue is protected like it's the Hope Diamond. There's like big giant barriers and padding around. Like no one is getting close to the Kobe statue. They were pouring concrete all around it. This week I was watching them do it, and there was like twice as many workers working around the statue as there were other places. That statue was being treated with special, I think they would call it bespoke handling, white glove handling by the construction workers on the Kobe statue area. So, but anyway, long story short, Crypto is not being used right now. So the Lakers can't play any home games. So they are all on the road. So they've been in Palm Springs. I think they're going up to, I think they're going to Phoenix. I think they're going to San Francisco. And they have this, I think they usually play at least one game in Vegas. I don't know. I'll see where MacMahon is. But then they went to this game in Milwaukee, and the game in Milwaukee was interesting. Not just because the Lakers had the long flight out there to play in it, but because JJ Redick was coaching for the first time against Doc Rivers. And if you remember when JJ, was on First Take shortly after Doc got hired, and he was complaining, Doc was complaining about how difficult the job was. Redick went after him, his old head coach with the Clippers for years. He was there for like 4 or so years with Doc.
Yeah, Lob City Clippers.
And by the way, there was a secondary storyline, which was Darvin Ham, who's now on Doc Rivers' staff, being there against his old team. But Darvin, still getting some of his paycheck from the Lakers, played it totally straight, thanked the Lakers, said, we did some good things. We had some bad things. I think everybody got better, got paid, blah, blah, blah. He played it politically correctly. JJ tried to be politically correct, but I think we're going to see this trend. I think every JJ press conference could go any direction. And I say that with a smile. I think it could go...
Well, I'll say this: JJ did not walk back his comments.
Well, exactly. All right, so let me
his
go
comments
over.
Were strong.
I don't think to Brian's point, I don't think JJ's ever going to walk back any comment.
I just think that there are times where JJ, he never loses his temper, but there are times where he lets his guard down and lets it go. And so
he said he regret my tone is what he said.
All right, hold on. Let me just see what he said. Okay, so here's what Redick said last year, or earlier this year, last season, after Doc was complaining about, how difficult it was taking over the Bucks midseason. He said, the trend is always making excuses. Doc, we get it. Taking over a team in the middle of the season is hard, but it's always an excuse. It's always throwing your team under the bus. There's never accountability with that guy. So what I remember about this is that I had, when JJ was ripping Doc, I had just seen an advanced copy via Ramona Shelburne of her series that was on FX.
On the Clippers, yeah.
Called Clipped. And I saw the first episode, and like one of the core scenes in the first episode is Doc Rivers having this dinner meeting with JJ Redick, because JJ is they're trying to sign him. That's like one of his first orders of business. They're trying to sign him, and Donald Sterling doesn't want to pay that much money because he doesn't want to pay that much money because JJ Redick is white. He apparently in the show they make it sound like he agreed to it, and then found out he was white and wanted to pull the offer. So Doc's trying to save the offer, and there's this.
Doc had a heads up on that particular detail.
Yeah. So I had just watched. There was this scene where Doc is talking to JJ. Making like this heartfelt plea. And, I think, Doc was interviewed for the series, or for the podcast. So I think this is based in reality. But anyway, I was like, my gosh, I can't wait for this episode to come out with JJ attacking Doc like this. Okay, so he comes to Milwaukee. Naturally, the reporters in Milwaukee are like, hey, where are you at with your old coach, Doc, who you're coaching against tonight? And here's what JJ said. He said, I don't carry beef with people, and I'm not going to get into the history of Doc and I's relationship right now, and I probably won't ever. He's fine in my book. MacMahon, that's what I say.
Last time fine came up in a quote, it didn't work out so great for that person.
He's fine in my book. And then, he also said after that first take appearance, there were a number of conversations that I had with people, both at ESPN and within the league, that provided a good amount of perspective, whether I had stayed in the media or whether I pursued a coaching job. I will say this, regret my tone in that case. I've owned that, and I regret my tone. Again,
but not his words.
Regret my tone, and I was wrong, are two drastically different statements.
Yeah, and I don't think JJ ain't going to be saying I'm wrong very often.
But by the way, MacMahon,
also,
that's what I
he
said.
was telling the truth. He was just doing it, and we've all gotten in trouble for this ourselves. Sometimes when you tell the truth very bluntly and plainly, people get upset.
Sure, but MacMahon, this is what I say about when people ask me about Bontemps. They go, "How's Bontemps?" I go, "He's fine."
Yes, exactly.
He's doing just fine.
Bontemps, I definitely had an executive with one of the teams that I cover on a regular basis come up to me the other day and just go, "How do you deal with Bontemps on a regular basis?" A guy that you know well. He said it with I detected a little bit of love in his voice.
I would like to think so. I've had a lot of people have asked me in reverse about that. I'd say it's a challenge on a daily basis, but I fight my way through it somehow.
It's fine. It's all fine.
It's all fine.
That's what people would always ask me about the Olympics this year. How were the Olympics? They were fine.
No, you didn't. You said the merch sucked.
That was not fine. I would have killed for some fine merch. Jeez.
Speaking of telling the truth in plain, blunt fashion. Now, Doc's retort. Old Doc.
Yes.
Listen here. Coaches coach and they pour into players. They really do. They pour in a ton of love to players, and oftentimes that love is rejected. It's just the way it is. Many times you decide to go in a different direction. You can never take it personal. You know you did the right things for that player. Most of the time, that player comes back later and understands it. And that's just the way it is. It's usually one-sided in that regard. I like that player. Come on, we can't get this is good stuff. It won't
just
happen.
Too bad they're in opposite conferences and they're not if they got to the finals, it'd be a heck of a story. But imagine a playoff series between the Doc and JJ teams. That would be super fun.
Hold on. We've got the NBA Cup, baby. Maybe it's true in Vegas.
Hey, it almost happened last year.
They were both there last year.
The Lakers have NBA Cup championship experience, and as you boys point out, the Bucks made a mighty run themselves last year.
Yeah.
Who did the Bucks get bounced by? Oh, the Pacers.
The Pacers.
Yeah,
the Pacers bounced the Bucks all season long. The Pacers, the whole season, where Pacers were bouncing the Bucks around. Yeah, and so MacMahon, who wrote the news story about all this, it's one of the more enjoyable news stories of the preseason, I have to say. He referred to what D'Angelo Russell. So first off, D'Angelo Russell has, he didn't speak to the media for at least over a week when the season started. Then he said Russell said that last time the Lakers were just winging it. And then that there have been other times where players have talked about how they appreciate JJ's structured approach, which was the implication being that Darvin was unstructured. So Darvin didn't take the bait on any of that, and he was all take the high road. But
listen, I thought Darvin Ham did a pretty damn good job when the Lakers went to the Western Conference Finals, and he ended up having to bench D'Angelo Russell for the last couple of games of that series. That's what I'll say about that.
Well, here's what Doc said about that, about players saying stuff about Ham. He said, "There's times when there's heartbreak for coaches. Darvin's dealing with that a little bit. He sees guys make comments now that he poured into. It's not right, but that's just what happens, and it's a part of our job."
Well, and look, coaching is a tough profession, honestly. I respect JJ wanting to get into it, but I thought he had a pretty sweet couple of gigs as it was. It is a tough profession, and it can be unforgiving, heartbreak, whatever you want to call it. But also, those guys get paid good money because it is a tough tough business. So we're not going to do too much violin. What do you do? Strum? What do you do on a violin? Violin playing for these guys.
You can strum it. It would sound a little odd, but you can strum it.
Yeah. I don't know. What do you call this little?
Well, down yonder, down your way, they call that a fiddle, man. Anyway, all right. Well, Bontemps had another interesting story on Friday. This was actually a pretty good conceit. Speaking of JJ Redick, but is this going to be an annual thing, Bontemps? The like your annual,
hopefully should be.
The
10 people who will define the 2024-25 NBA season.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said.
Like that, huh?
It's just a really good idea, quite frankly. And some of them we've already discussed on here, like JJ is on the list, as you can imagine.
Big
Joel
fella's
Embiid,
naturally on the list.
Joel Embiid is on the list. Cooper Flagg is on the list. Who gave a nice interview to Jonathan Givony. You should go try to find that.
That one's fairly simple. Cooper is obviously the headlining guy from what's a loaded draft class. And, there's a lot of teams that are going to be pursuing top 5 picks in this year's draft. I
think I just saw one of them in Dallas.
I think you did too.
the producer of,
and it wasn't the Mavericks.
That's right. The Mavericks did that a couple years ago, but not this year.
The producer of that interview, who was the on-site producer for Givony, they filmed it in Durham. Jomini Collins, she flew down to Sarasota and met me. I did the Donovan Mitchell interview which ran last week on NBA Today, and I said, "Well, how'd the interview go with Cooper Flagg?" She's like, "Oh, it's pretty good. We did it in the in Duke Basketball's podcast studio."
Oh, wow.
And I was like, how Duke of them to have a podcast studio.
Hey, JJ Redick's an alum, man. Come
exactly. How Duke of them. What do you want me to say? JJ has sadly announced his podcast will not continue. So we're all lost on that.
Hey, we'll keep a seat warm for him if he decides to come on back over.
There's a couple of people on this Bontemps list that I thought was interesting that you wouldn't normally have think about how important a time it is for them. One of them, Bontemps, you had on here is Wyc Grousbeck, the Celtics governor. The Celtics are, we talked earlier, in an incredibly strong position. Banner 18 is secured. Banner 19 is potentially within their grasp. And the Celtics are very publicly for sale under strange times and strange terms. And
I was going to say the terms especially.
Well, the term, everything's negotiable, but probably going to set a record for the highest sale of NBA team. Right now, that's the Suns. Matt Ishbia paying $4 billion. I think it cruises past that.
Yeah.
But
I'm talking about the terms of him saying, "Hey, we'll sell it, and then I'll run it for a while longer."
Well, exactly. I mean, the whole situation is a little bit unusual. Wyc Grousbeck, personally, his family, particularly his father, controls a very large percentage. He himself, while he's the governor, only controls a very small percentage, a single-digit percentage, I believe. It's been reported.
Yeah.
Bontemps, why do you have him on this list? I do agree, but I thought you could explain it.
2 reasons. One is whoever, him selling this team now, right? It sets up for an interesting dynamic, which is like the current plan by everybody's estimation is that this team will be sold sometime in the next few months. Before the end of the regular season, I think, is the likely outcome. So let's say it's sold in January or February, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have a new owner come in with a team that is the current favorite to win the title. And let's say they win the title. Let's say they become the first team to go back-to-back in 6 years, 7 years. And they then would be in position to do what? Be potentially the first team to go back-to-back-to-back to win 3 in a row.
Is Pat Riley's trademark of a three-peat still? I think it's expired.
Whether it's expired or not, the last team to do that was the Lakers a quarter century ago. The Celtics, I'm sure, would like to take the Lakers off that list. But this franchise, as of now, is set up to cost, as MacMahon is indicating to the YouTube watchers, $500 million next year in payroll and luxury taxes to set a new record. And this team is not necessarily a team that could just float $500 million in payroll and luxury taxes. So is a new owner going to walk in and immediately decide to cut payroll for a team that is potentially won 2 titles in a row? That's a pretty massive question, particularly when you're talking about the kind of talent that would be going out the door if one of the star players on the Celtics got traded. Now, I think a lot of that, like a lot of these things, will come down to how the season goes. And it's very hard for me to see this team getting split up if they win another title. But we're talking about unprecedented money and unprecedented situations on a lot of fronts.
By the way, the Celtics were purchased in 2003, 21 years ago, for $360 million. So you're talking about a payroll that is, 2/3 more than the cost of the team back then. Just FYI.
I have to get a calculator and double check your math, but significantly more for sure.
Yeah, a lot more money. The other part of it that's interesting is we have talked a lot on this pod about expansion and the possibility of expansion. And you mentioned the purchase price of the team, and it's going to be very interesting to see where the purchase price of this team lands, because one of the things that's going to determine whether expansion happens or how fast it happens is what the number in expansion fees the league can get for these two teams.
Mm-hmm.
And if the Celtics, one of the the standard bearing franchises in the league, goes for $6 billion or $5.5 billion or some number 5 or higher, then there's a certain indication of where you can go with a franchise fee for new teams. And if it comes in at 4 or somewhere around what Phoenix did, or slightly above or slightly below, then you might see a situation where the league go, well, maybe we should wait a little bit and see where things settle out. So, there's obviously the expansion stuff is still pretty far away until you see the league form a committee to really explore the possibility of expansion. It's still in the first stage.
Here's the thing when it comes down to expansion prices. Bontemps and I talked about this on a pod, or I don't know if we wrote something. Adam Silver changed his verbiage on expansion in 2021. So it's been 3 years, but all of a sudden he changed his verbiage a little bit. And at the time, I think Bontemps and I reported or talked about that the target number was 2.5 billion. And we didn't invent that number. That number came from somewhere. We said it. That was 3 years ago. That was when expansion was maybe first being discussed. It's laughable now.
Yeah.
So, if there's no expansion, there could not be expansion for another year or even 2 years. And you could listen and hear back and go hear this and say, oh, well, they said blah, blah, blah. You have no idea where it's going to go. The explosion of the value of franchises is crazy. But without question, watch what happens with the Celtics sale is going to set the market for all teams. And especially if you're the Minnesota Timberwolves and you're Glenn Taylor, Glenn Taylor supposedly had a change of heart into why he doesn't want to sell the team, or, they didn't, or Mark Lowry didn't satisfy the purchase agreement. Well, something has to do with the fact that he got 1.5 billion for it 3 years ago. And now teams are selling for 3.5 to 4, and the Celtics could go for another high of that. I mean, we're not talking about 10 years. We're talking about like 2.5 or 3 years that's happened.
Yep.
Yeah. And I really think, as much as like the expansion stuff is interesting to me, the most interesting thing about the Celtics sale is what you mentioned before: who buys it and how interested or capable are they of continuing to fund a contender at that price point? Because there's a lot of people around the league thinking, boy, is Jaylen Brown, is he the odd man? Like, who would the odd man out be in Boston if they've got to do some massive cost cutting? And I'm just saying, a guy like a Jaylen Brown, I don't know if that's the way it would go, but
it's a popular parlor game around the league to guess what Boston would do if they have to save money.
Hence,
I got asked it last night after the game by people.
Mm-hmm.
Hence, Wick is on Bontemps' list. Also on Bontemps' list, Ja Morant.
Yeah, I mean, this one's very simple. Like, 2 years ago, the Grizzlies were fine in the West and riding high, and everything looked great. And they have had a disastrous 18 months on a variety of fronts. And are they going to get back to being a top 4 team in the West? Is Ja going to get back to being a guy who was seen as a future MVP candidate and a guy who was one of the faces of the league, or is he not? Like that, this one doesn't require, I think, much discussion. It's probably going to go one way or the other. And like, there's not a lot of in between in Memphis, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, and you know what though? The one thing I wonder is, do the Grizzlies have if things break right, should they be a top 4 team in the West? Are they one of the 4 most talented teams?
The last 2 times they had their full team, they finished second.
Well, and I would say that the Timberwolves are much better than they were then. The Mavericks
I
much
agree.
better than they were then. The Oklahoma City Thunder certainly are, quantum leaps better than they were then. The Nuggets aren't better, but the Nuggets still have, the best player in the league right now, midway through his prime. But no, the Grizzlies, it's going to be a very interesting team. To me, the Ja is obviously fascinating for a wide variety of reasons, on the floor, off the floor, all that kind of stuff. But Edie is almost as interesting to me, just because, man, I mean, this is a guy who is a really unique player in a unique situation in terms of being relied on so much by a team that has aspirations of a deep playoff run as a rookie.
Yeah. I mean, there was a play. Yeah, there was a play early in the game. I was sitting there watching, and they were playing the Bulls. And I was watching it with a couple scouts while I was sitting through this game that was not much of a game. And there was a play early in the first half when he got isolated on Zach LaVine. And Zach, it was kind of a switch, and Zach tried to drive at him and score, and Edie blocked him and moved his feet pretty well and stayed in front of him, blocked his shot. And if he can move his feet like that and stay in front of a guy like Zach and contest his shot, he's probably going to be just fine moving around on the court, at least to be able to be out there. And yeah, to go back to your question about how good can they be, looking at the West now, if you've got a healthy Ja, a healthy Desmond Bane, and a healthy Jaren Jackson Jr., that's a pretty darn good place to start. And they should be really good. But again, Bane's had some injuries. Jaren's dealing with this hamstring thing now. Ja's
dealing with a little ankle deal now.
Ja left the game with the ankle thing the other day. So we'll see if they're healthy. But yeah, they're going to be fascinating, and Ja's certainly a huge part of that.
Yeah, nobody's ever questioned Ja's talent.
Also on this list, and another reason why I like this is because of how far and wide Bontemps is looking. One of the most interesting guys for this season, Charles Barkley. We all know that this is a good chance that there's litigation out there, but there's a decent to good chance that this is going to be Turner's last year with the NBA. Charles has announced he intends to stay with TNT beyond
after announcing he was going to retire.
Yes, there's many announcements that have happened. He supposedly got a 10-year contract. That was one of the craziest things. It is sort of known, in the highest end of any industry, when you are the supreme talent, when you're Tom Cruise, when you're Tom Brady, when you're, Charles.
When Barkley. You're Charles, yeah, he's in that class for sure.
Your contracts doesn't really mean anything. The contract begins and ends when the talent says. And so
this is a man speaking from experience.
That is not the case.
No kidding.
For me.
No kidding.
And even though Charles has, by the way, we know it's a 10-year contract because he said it is a 10-year contract. He said it's a 10-year contract at $20 million a year. I think that's what he said. But he was openly taking meetings with other entities.
Well, I believe in the same quote, he said he had a 10-year contract. He met with everybody and he was staying with Turner, all in one quote, which is just amazing. The perfect Charles quote.
That was the year before, 2 years ago, when Live Golf was sort of sniffing around, hiring him to be the face of their golf coverage. He's in the middle of this giant basketball contract, and he's openly flirting with Live Golf. He obviously didn't go that direction, but it's just amazing to me. So Barkley's saying that he's going to stay with that show. Who knows? But that show this year, I mean, they don't care about consequences and irreverence on an average Thursday in December. Can you imagine what that's going to be this year, where they have no concerns about the future, not worried about upsetting not that they were before, but have no.
Listen, they're gonna be here on Tuesday for next Tuesday for the season opener when the Celtics get their rings. They're doing a big thing, I think, over at Faneuil Hall outside, and yeah, it's gonna be. I mean, look, my entire life, Turner's had part of the NBA, and inside my entire existence watching basketball, that show has been a massive part of the league. So yeah, like one way or the other, things are probably going to look different in a year. And Charles and those guys are going to be at the center of all this stuff that's going on over the next several months. And like you said, they are irreverent on a normal day. It's Charles especially. So who knows what this year is going to look like.
All I'm going to say is last year in the last game of the season, they were in Minneapolis for the Western Conference Finals, Game 5. MacMahon and I were there.
Mm-hmm.
Mavericks win to advance to the finals. They're doing their last show of the year. They are, all this stuff is swirling around, they know. So they've got actual fishing poles that are up there. Going fishing, right? So Shaq is up there, and I just want you to picture this. They're on like the second deck, or like at the top of the lower bowl at the Target Center, and they've got these fishing poles. And Shaq is throwing the fishing pole back. Shaq must not do any fishing because he's like letting the hold go, and the line with, there's a freaking hook on this thing.
Just imagine somebody getting hit in the eyeball.
It goes backwards all the way back down to the court, and he's reeling it, and it hooks like a piece of trash or a t-shirt or something. And there's this t-shirt or trash dragging across the floor because Shaq is reeling this thing in from the second deck. And they keep doing it. And there's ushers down there taking cover because there's incoming fishing hooks. That's for the last time we saw inside the NBA. Imagine when this season.
No, they'll be on their best behavior for sure.
I'm sure they will be. Yeah.
Anyway, we'll check out that story. All right. Well, we got to pace ourselves because we're doing 3 this week.
Ooh.
The 2 of you are off on the Wednesday pod. I got to find somebody else.
I was going to say, what's this we?
Yeah, that's right.
We is always a confusing term with you.
You are correct.
Because you're more of a me than a we.
Is that right?
Yeah.
We'll see how that goes. Keep that attitude up all year, buckaroo. All right. Enjoy the lake. Bontemps, enjoy the game against the Raptors. Jackson, did Syracuse win yesterday?
Yes, they did.
No wonder Jackson was a little bit late to the pod. A little sleepy from the celebration.
Hey, North Texas won. Me and Green are 5-1, baby.
Kent State who are the worst team in Division I, played the second worst team in Division I, Ball State, in front of about 75 people and lost. So it's not.
Bonaventure remains undefeated since the 50s.
Bonaventure is unblemished. All right. Thank you for watching, listening to the Hoop Collective podcast. We'll talk to you soon.
Adios, amigos.